Super Stories of Science! Scientists are real-life superheroes. Clearly, this is not really a novel idea. Each and every scientist utilizes their special superpowers in a unique way. And a lot of people think about this. For example, Vital presents Labman! 10 traits of a science lab superhero. The dexterity of Mr. Fantastic. The analytical mind of Rocket Raccoon. The efficiency of Dr. Manhattan. The speed of the Flash. Accuracy of Hawkeye. Adaptability of Mystique. The integrity of Captain America. The organization of Nick Fury. The focus of Professor X. And the rigor of Groot. Is Groot really that rigorous? I don't think so, but good try, Vital. So even in specific science disciplines, we can find different superpowers. For example, in genomics, some scientists can read the code of DNA and RNA. Some act like Batman and are detectives regarding evolutionary history. Others can figure out magic of growing and dividing cells, and some use what can only be described as magic to decipher the code of mass spectrometry readings. Like superheroes, scientists have secret identities. You'd never know that the person behind you in line at the grocery store was the first scientist to sequence the COVID-19 virus or work on the vaccine. Like superheroes, scientists work in dynamic teams in order to save the world. And the best part about science is that it's an adventure. Personally, I geek out about storytelling, and there have been recurring themes within humankind's storytelling traditions. Joseph Campbell popularized the monomyth, which can be used to outline the recurring hero's journey towards enlightenment or greater purpose and understanding in many of these stories. This is what the hero's journey looks like all mapped out, but honestly, I like this one better. In this case, an adventurer starts with an ordinary life. They hear the call to adventure with help from their helpers. They cross the threshold from the known universe into the unknown, where they meet problems and perils. Eventually, they find themselves in the abyss at the hardest part of their journey. They eventually find out they have special powers, and then can return to their known world having undergone a transformation. The hero's journey is ever present in a lot of movies like Star Wars: A New Hope, Harry Potter, The Lion King, Clueless, and even Crazy Rich Asians. Modern media has simplified the hero's journey further down into the story circle. The hero's journey can take place throughout a single day. For myself, I start out in the zone of comfort, which is my bed. But I have a need or desire. I need to go to work to run a science storytelling workshop. I cross the threshold into the unknown where I meet new students and have technology challenges. I feel nervous about presenting about the science of storytelling, but I adapt. And I remember that even though it might be awkward, that's okay. Eventually, we complete the workshop about science and storytelling, but I pay the price. I figure out what did and did not work along the journey. But I return home transformed, having changed, and now I am more prepared for the next session, and I feel more confident and prepared. So what mythologies do we have as scientists? The biggest one that comes to mind for me is the mythology of genius. For example, a genius in science has an idea and then it is true. The problem with this mythos is that A, it's pretty boring, B, it's not true, and C, it's disempowering. The problem is that if I don't think I'm a genius, then I can't be a scientist. The journey of a super scientist is actually kind of boring. They just show the world that they're geniuses. They've always known, and then they're right. Helpers along the way are not necessary, and, well, because they were geniuses, well, they get their name on stuff. The true accomplishment of a genius scientist. The real hero's journey of science can be found in the scientific method. We can take the scientific method and lay it out on the story circle as follows. First, we start out with the zone of comfort. This is what we know. This is the literature. This is the background knowledge needed to guide our journey. We have a need or a desire and a call to adventure by forming new hypotheses. We then cross the threshold from the known into the unknown when the adventure to go and test our hypothesis arises. On the road of trials, we come to the trials of experimentation, where we work towards getting our experiment parameters just right. Eventually, we have a revelation, and we collect the data that we need. We then transform our understanding through the interpretation of the data, returning to the zone of comfort of what is known when we form conclusions, having undergone a dramatic change in our understanding. We can then share our findings and document conclusions before setting off to test a new hypothesis based on what we learned. The real work of a scientist takes place here in the trials of interpretation and experimentation. As another example, I'm going to map out a day in the life of an everyday graduate student in science. So oftentimes they start off their journey with meeting with a mentor before they go to test their hypothesis. On their trials of experimentation, oftentimes they're using a lot of supernatural aid, some coffee driving their experimentation in science. Along that trial is a many failed experiments, before eventually something works out. They have a meeting with the goddess, a revelation, some data to actually analyze and interpret, where they can then form conclusions, but oftentimes they pay a heavy price in this case, where they reject their hypothesis and they must start the process again the next day, forming new hypotheses and going through new experimentation. Unfortunately, science journals perpetuate the myth of science genius. Every scientist must master writing in a style for publishing in a scholarly journal to survive. It is a traditional approach to science storytelling, but not without its problems. In a journal article, there's an introduction. This is the background knowledge and why we have a great idea. We also have the methods, which tells us how we tested the hypothesis, and then we have the results. Here's the data. Lastly, we have the discussion. This is why our idea was a great one, and here's the context for how great it is. Unfortunately, this really perpetuates the myth of genius. It doesn't tell us about the challenges along the way. In the introduction, we don't get how many bad ideas they had before this one kind of worked out into a story worthy of publishing. Word limits often can limit the amount of detail that we can have in our methodology, and we leave out the things that we tried but didn't work. It perpetuates mistakes. So in the results section, we get the data, but only the data that fit the hypothesis. We don't see the data that didn't fit the hypothesis or that was a little strange and different or confusing. Imagine how boring our favorite stories would be written as a scientific report. Destruction of the one ring to rule all has positive effects on Middle-earth. A ring previously unreported to be that of Sauron needed to be destroyed. We determined that successful travel to Mount Doom and submersion of the ring in lava alleviates symptoms of evil wizardry on the land. The most interesting part of the story and the struggle is lost along the way. It's important to think about your audience when writing about science. If you're writing for a science journal, be matter of fact, direct, and remember everything must be bolstered by the literature. However, if you want to write compelling science stories for others, remember, what was the need, the desire? What was the challenge? What went wrong along the way? Did you want to give up? What did you learn beyond the data? Facing the struggle is the most important part of the most compelling science stories. So I encourage you to think about, what is your challenge? What takes you out of your comfort zone in your research, but then also as a person who is a scientist? Remember, being a scientist is all about the journey. Learning from failure is science. It's what gives us our superpowers. The best science stories are about learning from failure. Every experiment and research endeavor takes calculated risks, and most failures don't get reported. Compelling science stories take us on the journey of discovery. So hopefully today we could help you find your identity as a superhero scientist. Remember, we're using the scientific method as an ongoing process, and it's all about the journey. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed this science storytelling workshop.